Welcome to welcome to Torah Portions. I'm Sean. This is Kingdom in Context, and this is actually part of our Torah Apologetics series. So hopefully, as we review these scriptures, you're giving a little bit more of a better foundation to explain to your friends and family, or even to a stranger you may meet, a reason for your faith, some of the details about your faith that they're misunderstood, and just, helps you walk through the basic ideas, which is what hardly anyone has ever taught. This is why we have so many believers that fall away. This is why we have so many believers that are in confusion, and then unbelievers who criticize and mock with arguments that aren't accurate. So we want to show love to all those individuals and hopefully be able to share the word with them, because like I always repeat and always encourage folks to remember, the sower sows the word, Mark 4:14, and this is part of the word that we get to know, put in us. So thanks for joining us this morning. And if you're celebrating Shabbat, hopefully it's a good day of rest for you. If you're not, look into it. It'll be a good day of rest for you. I just want to thank everyone that's already here. We have quite a few people in the live chat waiting. Jeremiah 15:16 is back. Kizzy Teasdale, Hannibal, Susanna Avery, David Gooley, Nikki Latimer, Miss Marcia, Jaden Cox, Eddie Steckinger, Parkway, Bonnie Blaylock, Mama Lou Bear, Pepper Moon, The Clean Bee, West Plays Music, Mudman 71 Man 777, Anne McKenzie, Blue Doves is back. Welcome everyone. Cover to Cover with Jeremy Pierce, Eric Rice, Maxim Lavrov. Welcome everyone. Mr. Bear's back. So today, I was out last week, but today we're going to pick back up here in Leviticus 12 through 13. Before we do that though, guys, I just want to give a quick shout out. My wife is going to start maybe once a month. Maybe twice a month, depends on how available she is, but maybe once a month she's going to start doing we're going to add to our milk and meat on Friday nights, where she's going to do an open invitation to the ladies. So it's kind of like a ladies' night to chat about scripture and life. And so that's going to be this coming Friday night it's going to be a part of our milk and meat series. So 7 days from now. So check out that if you're, in the crowd, if you'd like to talk about ladies' issues according to scripture. And my wife will be leading the conversation, and I'll be there still because she asked me to be, but it's pretty much going to be a ladies' night. I'm just going to be hanging out in the backdrop and maybe answer any tough questions if she can't get to them. So, all right, guys, real quick though, I just wanted to start us off with, we got some unique chapters that we're going to review today. One's talking about cleanliness, idea of when a male or female baby is born and when they can be brought to the temple, when they can start having their first exposure to the angel of the presence that was with them at the tent of meeting and the tabernacle in the wilderness. So they had to be clean first, and we're going to actually review the history of that. And then we're also going to look into chapter 13, which goes over the ideas of leprosy. We'll break that down, and then we'll even look how that applies in other parts of scripture so that you can understand what it's talking about. Hopefully it'll give you some insight. But before we do, there's two actual songs that I used to listen to a long time ago, and it's by this really cool band that's out of Missouri called Waterdeep. And I'm going to actually play two of those songs today, one now and then one a little bit later after we read one of the chapters. As always, though, we are going to do the call in, and I'm going to have that scrolling at the bottom, that link to call in. I'm going to have that scrolling at the bottom of the screen when it's time to call in. So just be patient on that. We'll do that after we read chapter 12. But real quick, guys, just check out this. Hopefully this song will bless you. It's a praise song. And this is by Waterdeep and 100 Portraits.
Those who trust in the Lord are a strong mountain. They will not be moved. Those who trust in the Lord are a strong mountain. They will not King in my feet on a firm foundation that will not be moved. I said now Christ our King, He sets my feet on a firm foundation. Will not, no, baby, it will not be moved. No world moves like mad. You are Lord, our faithful. You are Lord, our faithful. You, Jesus, you will not be changed.
All right, guys. Hope that was a blessing to you. Fun fact trivia. One of the percussion beats in the background, they actually duct taped a cookie sheet to his foot for the drummer to make that slapping sound. So it's kind of interesting. But a great, talented band. Saw them in concert a long time ago, and they're a blessing. But all right, guys, we will get right into the Torah portion so that we can start learning the scriptures. This week, Leviticus 12 through 13, the full chapters of both. Let's jump right into Leviticus 12 here. So it says, Then the Lord said to Moses, Say to the Israelites, a woman who becomes pregnant and gives birth to a son will be clean for 7 days, as she is during the days of her menstruation. And on the 8th day, the flesh of her boy's foreskin is to be circumcised. The woman shall continue in purification from her bleeding for 33 days. She must not touch anything sacred or go into the sanctuary until the days of her purification are complete. If, however, she gives birth to a daughter, the woman will be unclean for 2 weeks, as she is during her menstruation. Then she must continue in purification from her bleeding for 66 days. When the days of her purification are complete, whether for a son or for a daughter, she is to bring to the priest at the entrance to the tent of meeting a year-old lamb for a burnt offering, and a young pigeon or a turtle dove for a sin offering. And the priest will present them before the Lord and make atonement for her, and she shall be ceremonially cleansed from her flow of blood. This is the law for a woman giving birth, whether to a male or to a female. But if she cannot afford a lamb, she can bring 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, one for a burnt offering and the other for a sin offering. Then the priest will make atonement for her, and she will be clean. So that's the end of chapter 12, guys. Let me put this real quick. I'll put the call-in link in the description or in the scroll at the bottom so you guys can call in. There we go. And I'm also going to put it in the chat if anyone wants to use that. Welcome to call in if you have any questions. I'm just going to answer the biggest and most prevalent question we get when we review this chapter. People say, well, am I in sin if I'm unclean? So I just want to say, no, you're not in sin if you're unclean. This is, you're not, this is not a situation where you've intentionally sinned. This is not even an unintentional sin. This is literally just life, right? God knows he designed you to have a baby. He designed babies to be born. Just because there's days of purification for both the woman and the child before they can come to the presence of God through this angel of the presence that was there. You doesn't mean that you've sinned any capacity. That there's, again, this gives us more, hopefully, better perspective when we look back at what an actual sacrifice is, being that it's a fellowship offering. So that's why you'd bring forth this sin offering and then also the burnt offering at the same time. Okay, so therefore, the priest will have something to eat, you can have something to eat, and the father has something to eat because you just had a baby and now you're coming to present it to the Lord. You want to celebrate fellowship with this meal. So it's not like you've committed some heinous act. You're just doing the natural process of life and giving birth, natural for everyone. But we're actually going to review where these ideas come from, why you'd have to wait a certain amount of days for the boy and a certain amount for the girl. We're going to review where this precedent came from and why the Father instituted this as a part of his Torah. So it's very interesting. And unless anyone wants to call in, I'll just go ahead and start into a companion passage here in Jubilees chapter 3, where we're going to look at the back history of where that came from. It says, and he awaked Adam, that's the Father through one of the angels in the garden, awaked Adam, or not in the garden yet. Adam was created outside the garden. He awaked Adam out of his sleep, and on awaking he arose on the sixth day. He brought her to him, and he knew her, and they said unto her, this is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. So this is when Adam and Eve are being created. If you read the furthering context of this passage, verses 1 through 5, it says that Eve was created in the second week, whereas Adam was created in the first week. So verse 7 says, I'll finish 6. It says, this is now bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. She should be called my wife, because she was taken from her husband. Therefore shall man and wife be one, and therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, and cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. In the first week was Adam created, and the rib his wife. In the second week he showed her unto him. For this reason the commandment was given to keep in their defilement, for a male 7 days, and for a female twice 7 days. And after Adam had completed 40 days in the land where he had been created, we brought him into the Garden of Eden to till and keep it. But his wife they brought in on the 80th day. And after this, she entered into the Garden of Eden. I think this is amazing. Not only does it say that they were, seemed to be a sense of union already before they entered the garden, but we get a little more detail on this very beginning process when God created mankind. The very first example of mankind, Adam was brought in first. 80 days later, Adam had to wait 40 days. Then she had to wait another 40 days past that. So it's very interesting. This is this idea of, making the boy child wait 40 days before coming to the presence of the Lord. Same thing with the female child. She had to wait extra time, right? The 14 plus 66 equals 80 days for the female child. And so therefore we have the same precedent of this idea with Adam and Eve being created, with all babies post haste, all babies thereafter being created, so that if there is any opportunity for them to come into the temple or the presence of the Lord, you'd want to do it so that you don't have any uncleanness on you, because that's why we're blending into chapter 13 here in a minute, to talk about what can possibly happen to you if you get uncleanness and come into the presence of the Lord, because this is very practical. But when you're interacting with something that is not of the same physics that you are in this creation. So this is why even in the very beginning, the angels are made of different substance. They're made of a different type of creation than Adam and Eve were. Yet there is this unique dichotomy in the beginning, with the garden being on the ground, connecting heaven and earth. The garden, as I've tried to explain in many passages, please go see Kingdom of the Garden, Kingdom Cast podcast that I did. It's titled Kingdom of the Garden on our Kingdom Cast channel, where I review how the Garden of Eden is the kingdom of God that comes back as the New Jerusalem. It was here to begin with as the garden, and it was setting down on the earth, connecting, so to speak, heaven and earth, giving access for Adam and Eve to dwell amongst the angels and be at peace, learn the ways of the Father. And they were there for 7 years, as Jubilees expounds, before they rebelled, and before they were conveniently shown the way out of because they had stepped out of obedience, and so then now in this since there's no garden, now we have this tabernacle, which is a replica of the temple in heaven that Moses and Aaron were instructed to build, so that people can interact with this incredibly powerful angel of the presence, who imagine being a proxy. He's like a conduit just to flow the power of God through him. This is how they were created. And he has incredible power, as the Father, tries to warn Moses in Exodus 23. And we see, I missed last week, guys. I'm sorry, but last week if you read the portion last week in between the chapters before Leviticus 12, you saw that Nadab and Abihu lost their life because they disrespected the presence of God, the power of God that was there, by bringing strange fire before the altar, and they actually suffered immediate death as a result of that. So this was a rough situation for Aaron and his family. His boys were actually drunk at the time that they did that. A lot of people think that could have been another reason. Not only were they doing the wrong things that they were instructed to do to interact with this angel of the presence on behalf of the Father, but they also came with an uncircumcised heart. So they came with the wrong heart, or wrong disposition. So that there's two things the Father promises that will happen when his kingdom comes, and anyone that ministers inside of his kingdom, inside of his house, that's going to be there. Just like those of us in the resurrection, we're resurrected to eternal life. He's going to put our laws on our heart. That gives us the eternal right disposition. This is why it says we won't have to learn his laws anymore. That we put on our heart, we'll do them perfectly. We won't sin any further, as 1 Enoch 5, 6-9 explains. Therefore, our heart will always be circumcised to the Father's behavior. We'll always have the right heart, the right disposition, and our bodies physically will always make sure that they're clean properly as well. That will be, as Ezekiel 44, 7-9 says, the Father ensures no one of uncircumcised heart or uncircumcised in the flesh will enter into his temple ever again, right? This is going to be once he's on the ground and he's no longer going through, this agency of man that he's entrusting to the priesthood. In fact, now when he has literally his house sits back down on the ground, and through his son, he's ruling all things, and his son is in this high priesthood, the resurrected Yeshua. We will have he'll have a much greater capacity to teach the people what's right, to show them how to do it and interact properly, so that no one can suffer any adverse reaction like Nadab and Abihu did. Now, they suffered the most adverse reaction, right? They suffered the most penalty, which is to immediately lose their life. But we're going to read in chapter 13 how there's other types of things that can happen when you, as a mortal man who may be unclean, both in body or heart, tries to step forward before a completely set apart, completely clean, completely holy God, or even one of his angels, right? And you try to interact with that and you're not ready, some bad things can happen. So this is why it's so important that the Father, this is what I try to explain to people. It's not a religious script, guys. This isn't just the Father making up stuff just for the sake of making it up. He doesn't want the female daughter that's born to have to wait 80 days before she's considered clean, or the mother to have to wait the time that she's instructed just for the sake of making up arbitrary numbers. He knows how he made the biology of things to work. So the biology of spiritual beings in heaven versus the biology of mankind on the earth, and when those try to interact in the capacity that he has set up with this temple for this extremely powerful angel, remember, there's different classes of angels. There's different biology of angels that are expressed to us in Scripture, just like he made different biology of land animals we interact with on the earth plane. He also made in the heavenly realms above different classes of angels. They have different jobs, different functions, different roles, different priesthoods. There's a hierarchy of authority. There's a hierarchy of power given to some greater than others. I always try to remind people that the rebellious angel Azazel, that we generically refer to as Satan, he's not the most powerful angel God ever created. He actually gets handled pretty thoroughly by Michael and Gabriel and Uriel and Phanuel at the second coming of Yeshua. So there's different power levels given to different forms of biology in this creation model. As a result of that, when you go through natural functions in your biology, there's practical instruction for how you can remain in a safe place, a good place, and still interact with the Father. And that's all we're reading about in Leviticus 12. It's very, very simple. The Father didn't want any bad things to happen to his children. So therefore, he's like, look, I just need the males to wait 40 days, the females to wait 80 days. I did this in the beginning with Adam and Eve. This is what's needed for their biology to interact and come inside a place where my presence dwells, even if it's through the conduit of one of my angels of the presence. Because if not, we're about to read some adverse things that could possibly happen to you. If not, right? If you do this wrong and you come in with an unclean body or an unclean heart. So there's a lot to this. All right, so no one called in. I'm going to take this off screen. We'll jump to Leviticus 11. Or excuse me, Leviticus 13. I'm counting backwards. All right, so in Leviticus 13, let me see here, verses 1-5. It says, then the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, when someone has a swelling or rash or bright spot on his skin that could become an infectious skin disease, he must be brought to Aaron the priest or to one of his sons who is a priest. The priest is to examine the infection on his skin. If the hair in the infection has turned white and the sore appears to be deeper than the skin, it is a skin disease. After the priest examines him, he must pronounce him unclean. If, however, the spot on his skin is white and does not appear to be deeper than the skin, and the hair in it has not turned white, the priest shall isolate the infected person for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest is to re-examine him, and if he sees that the infection is unchanged and has not spread on the skin, the priest must isolate him for another 7 days. The priest will examine him again on the 7th day, and if the sore has faded and not spread on his skin, the priest shall pronounce him clean. It is a rash. The person must wash his clothes and be clean. But if the rash spreads further on his skin after he has shown himself to the priest for his cleansing, he must present himself again to the priest. The priest will examine him. If the rash on his skin is spread, the priest must pronounce him unclean. He has a skin disease. When anyone develops a skin disease, he must be brought to the priest. The priest will examine him. If there is a white swelling on the skin that has turned the hair white, then there is raw flesh in the swelling. It is a chronic skin disease, and the priest must pronounce him unclean. He need not isolate him, for he is unclean. But if the skin disease breaks out all over his skin so that it covers all the skin of the infected person from head to foot, as far as the priest can see, the priest shall examine him, and if the disease has covered his entire body, he is to pronounce the infected person clean. Since it has all turned white, he is clean. But whenever raw flesh appears on someone, he will be unclean. When the priest sees the raw flesh, he must pronounce him unclean. The raw flesh is unclean; it's a skin disease. But if the raw flesh changes and turns white, he must go to the priest. The priest will examine him, and if the infection has turned white, it is to pronounce the infected person clean. Then he is clean. When a boil appears on someone's skin and it heals, and a white swelling or a reddish white spot develops where the boil was, he must present himself to the priest. The priest shall examine it. If it appears to be beneath the skin, and the skin and his hair is turned white, the priest shall pronounce him unclean. If it is a diseased infection that is broken out in the boil. But when the priest examines it, if there is no white hair in it, and it is not beneath the skin, is not faded, the priest shall isolate him for 7 days. If it spreads any further on the skin, the priest must pronounce him unclean. It's an infection. But if the spot remains unchanged and does not spread, it is only the scar from the boil, and the priest shall pronounce him clean. When there's a burn on someone's skin and the raw area of the burn becomes reddish white or white, the priest must examine it. If the hair in the spot is turned white and the spot appears to be deeper than the skin, it's a disease that broke out in the burn. The priest must pronounce him unclean. It's a diseased infection. But if the priest examines it and there's no white hair in the spot and it's not beneath the skin but has faded, the priest shall isolate him for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest is to re-examine him. If it is spread further on the skin, the priest must pronounce him unclean. It's a diseased infection, but if the spot is unchanged and has not spread on the skin but has faded, it is a swelling from the burn, and the priest is to pronounce him clean, for it is only the scar from the burn. If a man or woman has an infection on the head or chin, the priest shall examine the infection. If it appears to be deeper than the skin and the hair in it is yellow and thin, the priest must pronounce him unclean. It is a scaly outbreak, an infectious disease of the head or the chin. But if the priest examines the scaly infection, and it does not appear to be deeper than the skin, and there is no black hair in it, the priest shall isolate the infected person for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest is to re-examine the infection, and if the scaly outbreak has not spread, there's no yellow hair in it, it does not appear to be deeper than the skin, then the person must shave himself for the scaly area. Then the priest shall isolate him for another 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest shall examine the scaly outbreak. If it has not spread on the skin, does not appear to be deeper than the skin, the priest is to pronounce him clean. He must wash his clothes, he will be clean. If, however, the scaly outbreak spreads further on the skin after his cleansing, the priest is to examine him. And if the scaly outbreak is spread on the skin, the priest needs not look for the yellow hair. The person is unclean. If, however, in his sight the scaly outbreak is unchanged, the black hair has grown in it, then it has healed. He is clean, and the priest is to pronounce him clean. When a man or woman has white spots on the skin, the priest shall examine them, and if the spots are dull white, it's harmless rash that has broken out on the skin. The person's clean. Now, if a man loses his hair and is bald, he is still clean. Or if his hairline recedes and he is bald on his forehead, he is still clean. But if there is a reddish white sore on the bald head or forehead, it is an infectious disease breaking out on it. The priest is to examine him, and if the swelling of the infection on his bald head or forehead is a reddish white like a skin disease, the man is diseased, he is unclean. The priest must pronounce him unclean because of the infection on his head. A diseased person must wear torn clothes and let his hair hang loose, and he must cover his mouth and cry out, "Unclean, unclean." As long as he has the infection, he remains unclean. He must live out alone in a place outside the camp. If any fabric is contaminated with mildew, any wool or linen garment, any weave or knit of linen or wool, any article of leather, and if the mark in the fabric, leather, weave, knit, or leather article is green or red, then it is contaminated with mildew, he must be shown to the priest. And the priest is to examine the mildew and isolate the contaminated fabric for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest shall examine it, and if the mildew is spread in the fabric, weave, knit, or leather, then regardless of how it's used, it is a harmful mildew. The article is unclean. He is to burn the fabric, the weave, or knit, whether the contaminated item is wool or linen or leather. Since the mildew is harmful, the article must be burned up. But when the priest examines it, if the mildew has not spread on the fabric, weave, knit, or leather article, and the priest is to order the contaminated article to be washed and isolated for another 7 days. And after it has been washed, the priest is to re-examine it. And if the mildew article has not changed in appearance, it is unclean. Even though the mildew is not spread, you must burn it, whether the rot is on the front or the back. If the priest examines it and the mildew is faded after it's been washed, he must cut the contaminated section out of the fabric, the leather, the weave, or the knit. But if it reappears in the fabric, the weave, or the knit, or any leather article, then that means it's spreading. You must burn the contaminated article. If the mildew disappears from the fabric, weave, or the knit, or any leather article after washing, then it is to be washed again, and it will be clean. This is the law concerning a mildew contamination in wool or linen fabric, weave or knit, or any leather article, for pronouncing it clean or unclean. Okay, guys. So that's a longer chapter, and it's basically like reading a textbook for doctors at this point. You know what I'm saying? So while I was reading that, we had a brother call in. Chilo was calling in. I'm going to add him to the stream. How you doing today? Thanks for calling in.
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. What's up, brother? What's your question today?
So I actually had a question back for the last chapter.
Okay.
Pertaining a woman when she's in her uncleanness. And my question is what is it that in your opinion, we should do? Like obviously I live in Colorado, so we're not going to put our woman outside. What is it that we should do? Like how does a woman separate herself? She's not even supposed to sit on the same seat as anybody else.
What was the context? I actually did one of my first morning cups of context was about this, actually. Like my first 5 or 6 videos on the channel. And the bigger context, the greater overall context that we're reading here is that they're interacting with this tabernacle, this tent of meeting in the wilderness, and they're in an isolated area in the camp. So the actual word that's being used in these passages for putting the woman outside the camp, it's not the general assembly. It was just literally the part of the camp for where the tent of the tabernacle meeting was. So this was the idea that, if she's on her monthly cycle, or she has an uncleanness because she gave birth, this idea that you couldn't come towards to do her, like on a Sabbath or on a feast day, she wouldn't be able to come near the presence that we talked about. So this wasn't saying that you had to be removed from society. Now, in order not to, cause anyone else in your family that you're sharing the household with, so that they can continue to participate in all the, the instructions for coming close to the tent of meeting, that's where you go into those other details you're mentioning from Leviticus 14 and 15 about whether she can sit, whether they should share the same bed or all that stuff. The whole point of that, all that context was they were on a regular basis having to come before this tent of meeting to present themselves to the priests and offer the sacrifices they had. And then, of course, these powerful angel of the presence was there. So we're not in that circumstance today. We don't have an active temple or ordained priesthood. There's no incredibly powerful spiritual angel that's there that we need to come before and be clean as a result of. So that's why I started off saying it's not a sin of, it's not an actual sin that you've committed in some willful way. It's not a willful sin. It's not even a sin of omission. It's a natural byproduct of your biology that you're unclean. So in our modern day, if you live, in the modern times, the Father has scattered us intentionally. This is part of prophecy. We have no actual active standing temple that we're required to go to. It's not going to happen until the New Jerusalem returns. These laws will then apply for everyone that's encamped outside the New Jerusalem after the day of the Lord. But right now, none of this can be fulfilled right now. Does that make any sense?
It does, and I agree with that, which I guess leads me to the next question of, if we did have the temple and we did have the priesthood and somebody to take our offerings to, wouldn't it usually be the man or the head of the household that does that anyway and not the woman?
Well, sure, but the family comes with them. Yeah, you're gonna, if you're going to see the Lord, you want to bring the family. So yeah, the man may be the one that physically steps up and hands over the animal to the priest to be slaughtered and prepared, but the whole family is going to eat of that animal, just like we see with Passover, right? That would take the animal, the lamb or the goat, and have its portion according to the family size. So your whole family's involved in this because you're training up your child in the way they should go.
Okay, so you're saying that the whole family is supposed to eat of the Passover and not just the men over 20?
Right, yes. Yes, that there's, as far as I understand, there's no instruction just for people of a certain age group to eat the Passover. The whole family participates. That the census was for men over 20, and gathering the men for war, that was for men over 20. There's also rules for priesthood, specifically for the gender of men, and also then what age group they needed to be. But as far as the family participating and bringing forward, your fellowship meals with the Father to the priesthood at the tabernacle, tent of meeting, or at Solomon's temple, that was a family affair, to my understanding.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
so are you familiar with the temple scroll found in the Dead Sea Scrolls? And if
I
so,
have, from what I've studied of it, there's a lot of red flags that pop up. But what's your question about it?
well, specifically, there it says that the women and the children under the age of 20 don't eat of the Passover. And
Okay. Do you realize that the guy who wrote the temple scroll thought that Moses built the wrong tabernacle?
no, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, I would
Where does that come
research
from?
it. That's, well, it's through the everything written in the temple scroll. So he actually, I would do a lot of research on the temple scroll and figure out, or just investigate it further. There's a reason why we don't talk about it on our channel, because there's a lot of red flags with that. So there's some issues with not just the instructions for how the people were to interact with the priesthood, but there's disagreements from the guy who wrote the temple scroll with the priesthood's behaviors and instructions for doing their duties, as well as the design of the temple. So it's kind of a very, it's a hotly contested scroll. That's for sure. That's for sure. So yeah, we don't talk about it on our channel because we're still studying out, but what I have studied about it, there's a lot of things in it that doesn't seem to match.
So doesn't it seem like there will be different temples? And I mean, is every temple supposed to be the same exactly as the first temple that Moses built, or Solomon?
Well, no, it's not. That's not the claim of the temple scroll, to my understanding. The claim of the temple scroll is not that there will be a greater expanded temple for all these same instructions to take place, like we see in Ezekiel, or even like we may reference from the New Jerusalem, but which to my understanding is the same temple that Ezekiel's talking about. But the temple scroll makes the grandiose claim that Moses received bad information from God, and that
Okay.
he should have built something different.
All
So
right.
that,
I guess I wasn't familiar with that part. I must have skipped over in my haste and not noticed that they said that Moses built the wrong temple. Because I thought that it was a possibility that we're supposed to have different temples, because I mean, obviously there's more than one temple, being, what we have from the New Jerusalem, or know about the New Jerusalem, what we know about the millennial temple from Ezekiel.
Sure. But the example that you just brought up is what I was referring to. In addition, the claims of that, and this is why unfortunately, I don't have time to do an entire debate on the temple scroll right now, but because we're still going through some more texts. But just what you brought up as your initial claim, or that you read from that scroll, was that there is specific instruction that we don't get in any of the instructions that would actually contradict, from my understanding, Leviticus 12, as far as the whole family taking part in the Passover, which then would carry forward, just like we see in 2 Chronicles chapter 30 and Hezekiah's large Passover. It's not just the men eating as a representative for the whole family. The whole family would participate. So this would be a part of how you're engaging and bringing the whole family before the Lord. So this was, just there's some things that we take issue with the temple scroll.
Okay, well, thank you for pointing that out for me. I'll look
Brother, no problem. Yeah, man. And then in the future, we will be doing a video on the temple scroll. It's just on our list of lots of videos we need to do. So,
all right. Well, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome, brother. Thank you. Have a good Shabbat.
Thank you.
And Susanna's calling in. Hey, Susanna, welcome.
I just wanted to
Can you hear me?
jump in real quick. I've only got so much battery, but I've never read Jubilees. Well, actually, I have read Jubilees 3, but I'm not really familiar with it. But I just wanted to add, I've heard it said with the verses about how the purification from the female babies took longer. A doctor said that it's because the woman retains sort of the hormones longer than when she has a male baby. So I found that really interesting, biologically speaking. And also that when they were put outside the camp, it was actually a great mercy given to the women by Yah, because, you know, I mean, it would have just been like a giant baby nursery, and time for the woman to heal and have no, you know, stress or obligation, particularly marital wise, just to bond with her babe at postpartum period. And actually, those were the verses that got me into Torah, believe it or not, because I realized if the women were all put outside the camp and it was like a baby nursery, how kind of Yah to do that for the women, and for them to just relax and heal, you know, being in the dispersion and being away from family, having 3 babies of my own. Boy, I would have just loved to have been able to just, you know, kick up my feet for a while and just, you know, have my baby, you know, resting next to me all the time while I heal. And but alas, so I just wanted to jump on and add that. You know, I don't know about you know, I'm not very well versed with Jubilees just yet, but yeah, I just found it really lovely that, you know, Yah always has often a biological, medical kind of reason, as well as, you know, the wonderful spiritual side of things, such
Mhm.
as, you know, what we just read in Jubilees 3, you know,
Yeah.
with the, you know, system of angels. And yeah, that's all I really wanted to jump on and say. I could be wrong. The doctor could be wrong, of course, but
So you're trying to say that the women
there you
weren't
go.
just itching to get back to their corporate job and get back to deadlines and reports and meetings?
Oh, maybe some, but you know, I don't.
Yeah, just I jest. I think we have a connection issue with your stream. I apologize, but yeah, all great points. There's lots to consider for sure. Yeah, definitely the
That's
Father has
fine.
built into his Torah a place of rest and recourse
Yeah.
for all these circumstances.
Definitely. Torah is wonderful. So I'll leave it here. But thank you for having me on.
Okay, yeah. Thank you, Susanna. Have a good Shabbat. All right, guys. Appreciate you calling in. Real quick, now you're welcome to still call in, but I'm gonna I have actually we just read about, you know, the time of boys and women being the boys and girls being born and the times of their uncleanness before they were brought before the temple. And then we also just read about different types of skin diseases that can happen and how the priest is to evaluate them, kind of like a medical doctor. And there's different circumstances for those. But one of the big one that's in there is this idea of leprosy, and there's plague involved. So this is something that my wife and I touched on when we did our Kingdom portions a couple years ago. I just thought that we said it really well at that point because of the research we did from past medical research to present day medical research. So I have a little bitty clip from a Kingdom portions that we did where my wife and I are breaking down Leviticus 13 together, and I'm just going to play that for us real quick because it's very apt to what we're talking about today as well. So check this out. It's about 7 minutes. Okay, it's a little bit bigger chapter, and so it's on. I imagine there's some gentlemen at the house right now that have gone bald that are like checking their hair, like their head and their forehead right now. So that's why one of the reasons we're excited about this particular episode is because we want to give what we feel is great encouragement through this topic about what modern medical assessment of it would be, what the biblical application of this idea is going to show. We're going to go over that in some of our pairings. and then hopefully it'll bring a lot of relief and a lot of understanding to this topic.
Right.
So
Yeah, because, okay, so the way Sean and I stumbled upon actually studying out this topic of leprosy was we were driving home from the mountains one day and we were listening to Leviticus on audio, and we got to these chapters, and I just kind of like absentmindedly was like, hey, have you ever thought about how the Torah is going to apply in the kingdom? What do you think leprosy has to do with all of that? And we started talking about it because there's no other disease in the scriptures that's given this kind of attention and explained in this way. In fact, it's the only one, as far as I know, that's completely explained like this, and how to find it, and how the priests are involved in diagnosing it and quarantining people and things like that.
and next week we're going to go into even more quarantine and diagnosing of not just articles of clothing, but your actual house.
Right. Right.
So it's the person, the clothing, and the house.
Right. So we got home and we started looking up leprosy, like in the modern vernacular, because I certainly didn't realize that what we had just listened about in Leviticus was actually different from what's described in the medical books. And other people have stumbled across this throughout time as well. We found some old articles written about it from the early 1900s talking about biblical leprosy as opposed to actual medical leprosy. So I'll just read to you guys from WebMD, just a short summation real quick. Leprosy is an infectious disease that causes severe disfiguring skin sores and nerve damage in the arms, legs, and skin areas around the body. The disease has been around since ancient times, often surrounded by terrifying negative stigmas and tales of leprosy patients being shunned as outcasts. However, leprosy is not actually that contagious. You can catch it only if you come close in repeated contact with the nose and mouth droplets of someone who is untreated from leprosy. So basically what you'll find for the symptoms of this, it's like skin lesions, muscle weakness, and ultimately, if it goes untreated, I mean, totally loss of, mostly your digits. So sometimes your hand and your foot. Basically, symptoms that we do not see described
Did we
here
see
in the
any of that
scriptures.
described in chapter 13?
The only symptom I could see where people might have somehow made this connection is there are light. It starts as light lesions on the skin. So we see him talking about, if the skin is white, if the hair and the skin is white.
Let's slow down real quick, so that we forgot to say something, right? Is that was in this process that we read about here, was there a cure for leprosy?
Oh, well, no.
That's right.
Right.
That's right. So what did it say? That if the person was put in quarantine and the scab got better,
Right.
then it wasn't malignant, right? And they were cured. That it healed itself, basically. The body healed itself,
Yes.
right? We're actually going to go into what we suspect causes the actual healing, right? But what you just read from WebMD, that's if left untreated, it's disfiguring and debilitating.
Yeah, because what they found over time is it went from people thinking it was, punishment from the gods and things like that to some guy with the last name of Hansen. It's called Hansen's disease now. It's not just referred to as leprosy anymore. This guy Hansen realized that it was actually a bacterial infection. So once they figured out it's bacterial, well, then it can be treated. We also don't see any hair loss mentioned,
Right.
and we don't see any mentions of hair being white inside these wounds, which this seems to be very much the focus of
right.
diagnosing this is the white hair in the raised wound.
Right.
So.
Well, depending on whether it's scab, a
Right.
burn,
Yeah.
depending on what part you're reading, but absolutely. So point being, the symptoms are not the same from
Right.
what the modern medical society calls leprosy, which is now called Hansen's disease.
Yeah.
Okay. So what we're trying to help you understand is that the terminology used in the scriptures of the word leprosy does not match the modern medical use of that word leprosy.
Right.
And then so we did some research on why were these translations, why is this actual word being used in the translation? Because it comes up from the KJV the most, right? And this was, went back to what, Jerome's translation of the
Jerome's
Latin
translation
Vulgate,
of the
right?
Latin Vulgate.
Is where they used this
Right.
particular word, leprosy.
Right, because before that it was just called plague.
The plague, right.
Yeah.
Right. And that's why you'll see in the KJV at the end of chapter 13, where it's talking about this concept of, if it says in the same like verses, it calls it leprosy, but then it calls the plague at the same time.
Right.
So I think that now this version we read from doesn't specifically do that, but the KJV does, because that was what it was
Right.
originally called, was just plague.
Right.
Right. So that's wild,
Yeah.
because we see that term plague used quite often in the
Yes, we
scriptures.
do. We see plagues breaking out quite a bit in that 40 years of shenanigans in the wilderness.
That's right. And one thing we do want to say real quick is that when we looked up this in this actual word plague that's used in the Hebrew, it was used in a wide variety of cases, but specifically it was not, and I want to make this clear, it was not the same word used in Exodus chapter 9 for the plague that killed
Right.
the firstborn of
Right.
Egypt, both people and animals. So that was a different type of plague. That was like an instant death overnight type of plague,
Yeah.
right? Whereas this type of plague, which is more of a skin deterioration or just skin, you're showing problems on your skin basically. And apparently it can be transferred to clothing or things made of
Right.
leather, which is actually just skin. Leather is
Right.
also skin. Or as we're going to read next week, even to your house.
Right.
Now, so we've got different definitions from the modern medical ideas, right? As far as what they're calling Hansen's disease, which affects the nervous system and literally eats away at the flesh. And we've
Right.
seen these movies, right? We've seen people what they're calling leprosy attributed to biblical times, people wrapped in,
Right.
covered up in in several different wraps so no one can see them. And then in some, scary moment in the movie when they do reveal that, oh, they're missing digits or whatever, and they look disfigured and horrified.
Yeah.
And they're always, hanging out the edge of town or whatever, because like it talks
Yeah,
about.
on their carts with their little bells.
Right,
I mean,
right.
that really is real in India. People with leprosy are still treated that way.
That's right. And so while the similarity as far as putting them away from the rest of the community may be there, the actual symptoms and the actual cause
Right.
from our research of this idea and from the language itself was not originally the term leprosy. It was the plague, and it was a specific type of plague that we see a pattern only happening in a specific environment.
Right.
And that is
Right.
the uniqueness of this topic. And that's so. What do you think? Should we just get to our pairings and then start fleshing it out?
Yeah, I think let's get to our pairings. We'll talk about Adam and Eve, and then we can get back to leprosy.
Oh yeah, that's right. All right, so our
Or maybe we should call it plague from now on.
right, just help people understand.
Yeah.
So hopefully that was clear. It's our modern understanding of leprosy is not what this is being talked about in Leviticus 13 when it's referencing the idea of plague, and specifically this plague that would break out. So we're going to actually in our pairings we're going to look at other uses of the term plague and how this can actually how it can actually affect you in this, like I said, this common denominator that we saw, which was really the environment. It seemed like the environment that these people would step into, this is where you would get this type of plague. And if it specifically had to do with the state of your heart, the state of your body. So we're gonna expound upon that environment here with additional passages. But before I go there, I just wanted to do one more thing here. Because this is just trying to spice up the format just a little bit. And I just wanted to offer one more song from Waterdeep, and it's called Whatever Thing. So I thought it was interesting because of what she's singing about, even though she doesn't, I don't know if the author of this song has any understanding of what I'm teaching today, but what she's thinking about is about when she comes before the Lord, whatever thing that she's carrying with her, she want to lays it down. She wants to get rid of it so that it doesn't stop her from interacting with her Father. And that's what we're talking about today, guys. With with Leviticus 12 and 13. So may be blessed by this song, and just give me 1 second and I'll be right back.
Whatever thing that I have carried in this place that will keep me from you, I will lay it at your feet. Whatever burden I have carried for so long that will keep me from seeing you, I will lay it down right now. I need to hear you speak to me, and I want to feel you in this place.
Yeah. Good song, good stuff, great album, good times back in the day. Lots of tears shed in worship to some Water Deep back in the day. And they're very, very anointed, even though, I may, as I've matured in the word over time, I may look back at some of their stuff and think, all right, well, you know, who's teaching them their theology, but their hearts are in it. They're they're doing their best with the gift of music and song that given to them to praise the Father, and I respect that 100%, even if their theology is not perfect. So, yeah, good stuff, guys. Whatever thing when you're trying to come before the Father, even if it's just in your own prayer closet at the house, whatever thing you're bringing, let it go, drop it, so that you can get close to the Father and enjoy that experience. That's why, until we get our resurrection bodies, this is the outline that he gave us in his word, passed down with this temple situation, with this tabernacle tent of meeting situation, where he's showing you how to interact with him. You remember in Deuteronomy where Moses says, what other nation has a God so near as we can come near to our God, right? So this is a unique aspect where the creator of heaven and earth knows our limitations because he made us. He knows our biology. He tried to give us an environment to begin with where we could interact with his presence. Even though we couldn't physically see him at that time, we were still mortal in the flesh. So he gave us this wonderful priesthood that we could be a conduit, that could be an agent, a mediator between us and the Father to interact with and still experience his wonderful presence, right? As far as the power that would emanate through the Spirit that brings about the feelings of peace, safety, security, rest, love, all those things that come from the Father. Spirit of wisdom, right? Spirit of understanding. These wonderful things that we get, these fruits of the Spirit that we can, we feel tangibly when we're around them, when other people are producing them, much less an entire angelic priesthood ministering to Adam and Eve in the garden. How amazing that would have been, right? When there's nothing but fruits of the Spirit's coming off of them, except for that pesky Azazel guy. So then this is where we get this, now that circumstance has gone away. So now we got this tent tabernacle meeting situation where the Father again is trying to interact with mankind, but because of the physical biological limitations of how he created everything, you have to kind of circumvent some of these issues. And how he does that is through all these for me. But that requires an active participation on the people that he's calling to come forward. So this is same for us today. It's an active participation. We have to willfully choose to drop our stress, to drop our fear, to drop all the things that are trying to prevent us from just having the right heart to come before the Father and being able to step up, or in the body as well, right? And even though we don't, like I was just explaining to our previous caller, even though we don't have the circumstances of Moses and Aaron in this tabernacle today and the priesthood set up and everything happening, we do our best right now. We pray knowing that the Father assured us through his prophets that we have the Son of God, the Son of the Creator, is ministering on our behalf in a priesthood in the heavenly temple above. And this is who we confess our sins to. This is who we pray. This is who we ask through the agency and the priesthood of our Messiah, Jesus of Nazareth. We ask as we pray to the Father, our petition, right? This is why it talks about Jesus being our faithful high priest, that if we confess our sins, Yeshua in his priesthood as a part of that process steps in, who's faithful and just, and will cleanse us of all unrighteousness, because he takes our prayers before the Father and says, please forgive them, right? Cover over these sins, make forgiveness for these, please. This is the wonderful job of our high priest that he's doing on our behalf. So we have assurance that we have forgiveness before the Father. So this is why Yeshua would tell us to pray to the Father, right? You don't pray to a man. You don't pray to a priest. You pray to the Father. Yeshua, who's been a resurrected, glorified new creation of a man, now stands in a place of priesthood, just like Aaron would have been back in Leviticus 12 and 13, on behalf to hear the sins of the congregation, bring them before the Father to make atonement, forgiveness. So this is the beautiful process we still have applicable to us today. The distance is off, right? We don't have the physical geographical distance like they did back in the wilderness. They're not literally next to this amazing angel who's just glowing the fire, because that's a part of his biology, right? These ministers of fire that are angelic angels of the presence. So we don't have that. So this is where our faith comes in, that we do have the Son of God, our Messiah, resurrected and glorified, lives forever, put in a position by the Father as our high priest to minister on our behalf so that we can present our prayers and petitions to him. He then takes them to the Father. There's atonement, forgiveness created, and that we can be reconciled to God. This is part of the beauty of this process the Father gave us. In the future, at the second coming, when the Son comes and removes the wicked from the earth and brings down the New Jerusalem to set down, which is the return of the Garden of Eden, he resurrects the saints, right? And then everyone else who's still mortal, they're learning the same information that we're reading today. This is what Isaiah 2:2-5 talks about. The nations will come to the mountain of the Lord. Excuse me. The nations will come to the mountain of the Lord to talk about and learn about this exact information we're reading today, because this is how they are going to learn how to step close to the presence of the Father, which is going to be emanating from the New Jerusalem, which is going to be emanating from the resurrected saints, which will be emanating from Messiah himself, the King of Kings, Lord of Lords, who is the ruler of earth and heaven, right? Who's been given that placement by the Father. So this is why they're going to have to learn that information too, because they're still in their mortal bodies. They can't come close like you could if you had a spiritual glorified body like we get at the resurrection. So this is what this being taught in the wilderness. This is why all these little bitty instructions seem arbitrary to the outside person who doesn't understand, who hasn't really taken the time to read the book and try to gain an understanding of what's really being said here. Like, what's the interaction with these people? Why are they being told these information? What does it matter to them? All of it matters because all of it is about them getting close to the Father. He's giving you practical ways. Like, so he already gave you the non-practical. He's already given you the intangible. He's already given you the heart way, right? He told you, love me with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind. He told you, these are the things to do that are actions that you do in your heart and mind. But now he's given them the practical actions to do in their outward actions, their body. So he's covering all the bases, both their heart and their mind. So how do you love the Lord your God with your heart, soul, strength, and mind? Well, he's given you all the fullness of how to do that through his instructions. This is why Torah is loving instructions. So hopefully this is becoming more palpable, more understandable, and more clear as we go through this. This is not burdensome stuff for someone in a modern day to come along and say, well, see, that was just for the Jews. That was a burdensome regulation that no one could keep. And I'm reading this here in Leviticus 12 and Leviticus 13. And I'm sitting here going, you clearly have never read the book. You've never read these chapters. You never sat down to understand these chapters if you did read them, because how could these possibly be burdensome? He's literally telling them, this is how you cure any diseases that you received, and this is how you come close to me. How is that possibly a burden? It's just, it hurts the heart to hear some of this out of context teaching that we do in our modern life. It just hurts the heart. But it's because they don't realize they're doing a disservice to the Father. They're slandering the Father's beautiful, loving instructions of how he's trying to get close to us. So yeah, it's all right. Let's keep going, guys. Numbers 12. We got some stuff to still cover, and Numbers 12 here is one of our companion passages where it talks about Miriam and Aaron. One second, let me put this on the bottom of the screen in case anyone wants to call in. You're welcome to do it at this time. I'm going to start reading this real quick. Here in Numbers 12, Miriam and Aaron criticized Moses because of the Cushite woman he had married, for he had taken a Cushite wife. Does the Lord speak only through Moses? They said. Does he not also speak through us? And the Lord heard this. Yes. Just to let you guys know real quick, this is under the general assumption. Other texts make this claim, but it's under the general assumption that Zipporah has already died, so that's why he took another wife, and specifically a Cushite wife, which would have been from the area in southern Egypt, right? What we would call southern Egypt. Back then, they would have called it the northern kingdom or the upper kingdom back then. So even though it was what we would refer to as southern Egypt. And then verse 2 talks about the complaint of Miriam and Aaron and what they're saying. Does the Lord speak through Moses? And has he not also speak through us? They're basically saying they're challenging Moses' authority right now. This is not just them complaining in the way of like, oh, it's our brother and, why is he so important? No, this is for them to say, look, if the Lord speaks through us too, we can lead. Right. So Moses was kind of given that, even though Aaron has already been crowned with the priesthood at this point, he's already been given leadership. He and his sister, and we're about to see here, it looks to seem like his sister was more at fault here in this situation as far as bringing up this type of criticism against Moses. And of course, this is kind of done through don't get me wrong. I'm not discounting Aaron here because he's definitely mentioned in here, and they're both criticizing Moses because of this situation. But it's almost as if they're saying Moses has disqualified himself from leadership because he married a Cushite woman, and then they're saying, "Well, look, we can lead because God speaks to us too." So this is very interesting because from a woman's perspective, it does call Miriam a prophetess. So, and she's a part of leadership here. But as you read the rest of Torah and put it all together, it would see that that would be over the women and not over the men. The men would lead over men. Other women would help teach and lead over other women. But ultimately, the man was part of the priesthood, which had authority over all. Verse 3, now Moses was a very humble man, more so than any man on the face of the earth. And suddenly the Lord said to Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, you three, come out to the tent of meeting. So the three went out, and the Lord came down in a pillar of cloud and stood at the entrance to the tent and summoned Aaron and Miriam. Guys, what have we been talking about in the previous months? This angel of the presence that's going with them. It's referred to as the Lord. He's the presence of the Lord. We already know that the physical creator of heaven and earth is not there in the wilderness with them. This is his agent. This is his representative that he sent. Everything this guy says and does, it's as if the Lord says and does it. So it's right that the author of Numbers would rightly refer to this angel as the Lord, because they understood how agency worked. This is very common. He's a representative. He has the words of the Father to present to Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. This is how it works. So this is why it can say this pillar of cloud came and stood. We already know who the pillar of cloud is. The Father told him, I'm going to send this angel to go before you. Be pillar of cloud by day, fire by night. So the Father himself has already given us the context to explain who's standing there talking to Moses, Aaron, and Miriam in this moment. It's the angel of the presence. Is it Michael? Is it Gabriel? Is it Uriel? Is it Phanuel? I don't know. I don't know which one it is. It doesn't really say that part. I know it's not Yeshua, because Yeshua was not created as an angel of the presence. We're told that in First Enoch and all these other places. He was the Son of God with the Father before time began, before the angels were created. He's not one of these created beings on day one. He was alive before day one. So this is why we know this angel of the presence fallen in the wilderness is not Yeshua. No matter what metaphoric representation that Paul gives us in Corinthians, we know from the context of the actual text that it's an angel. And so, yeah, this would be our baseline to go forward with any future metaphoric representations or comparisons. So the three went out, and the Lord came down in a pillar of cloud and stood at the entrance of the tent and summoned Aaron and Miriam. And when both of them had stepped forward, he said, now hear my words. If there's a prophet among you, I, the Lord, will reveal myself to him in a vision, and I will speak to him in a dream. But this is not so with my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my house. I will speak with him face to face, clearly, and not in riddles. He sees the form of the Lord. Is he seeing the form of the Lord? I mean, he saw the backside back in Exodus 34. But in this moment, like, he's literally face to face, just like in Exodus 33, he's been seeing this angel the whole time. He face to face, the thing that drops down to the tent of meeting and stands there from the pillar of cloud is the form of an angel. Now, here's the interesting part that I think is important to understand First Enoch, is that in First Enoch, there's, I think it's chapter 19, it talks about the angels that have the ability to take on, they look like flaming fire, which is exactly what this angel of the presence is, like a pillar of fire, but he also can take on the form of a man. Well, what does Genesis 1:26 tell us? The Father, and I would suggest the Son as well, are saying, let us make man in our image. Let us make man in our form. So therefore, when the angel shows up and takes on the form of a man, which is what First Enoch tells us these angels can do, they're taking on the form of the Lord. We were made in the image of the Creator. We're the image bearers of the Creator. It's all very fitting if we take to context these descriptions where we get these ideas from previous texts. So hopefully that's clear. Why then were you unafraid to speak against my servant Moses? So this is the Father through this angel kind of grilling Moses and Miriam, saying, look, I made this guy. Like, I'm literally have chosen him. I've anointed him. I've ordained him to be in this position. I've proven it with lots of miracles. And I speak with him face to face through the form of this angel. Why are you afraid to speak against him? I've literally chosen him to be the one that's in leadership over even you two. Why are you trying to speak against him and challenge his authority at this point, which is the authority the Father gave him? So the anger of the Lord burned against them, and he departed. The angel of the presence departed. As the cloud lifted from above the tent, suddenly Miriam became leprous, white as snow. Aaron turned toward her and saw that she was leprous, and said to Moses, "My Lord, please do not hold against us the sin that we have so foolishly committed. Please do not let her be like a stillborn infant whose flesh is half consumed when it comes out of his mother's womb." So Moses, now look, guys, this is Aaron pleading to his brother Moses for mediation to the Lord. This is the high priest, who's the mediator of all of Israel, pleading to Moses for mediation on behalf of his sister Miriam to God. So then Moses turns and does. He does this faithfully. He says, "Moses cried out to the Lord, 'Oh God, please heal her.' But the Lord answered Moses, said, 'Is her father had spit in her face? Would she not have been in disgrace for 7 days? Let her be confined outside the camp for 7 days, and after that she may be brought back in.'" So Miriam was confined outside the camp for 7 days. The people did not move on until she was brought back in. After that, the people set out from Hazeroth and camped in the wilderness of Paran. So guys, I'm sitting here like this, just like we read in Leviticus 13, this idea that if they had this, this idea of having these infections that become white, and you have what was called plague, which is the use of this word leprosy in Numbers 12, then your body will naturally heal itself. And Moses is crying and asking for healing, but the father's like, "Well, she'll be healed in 7 days, but she's still going to undergo disgrace for her behavior." This is a very merciful punishment, in my opinion, because we already got, like, in 4 chapters later, the same instance happens with Korah and 250 other people, and they rebel against Moses, and they don't get this merciful of a warning, if you will. They don't get this shot across the bow for 7 days of white skin leprosy. They get instant death through sinkholes. So this is a very merciful thing that the father is doing to say, look, even if she came out and disgraced her father and her father spit in her face, she would be disgraced for 7 days. She's gonna suffer something here, because she's literally challenging my authority I gave to you. So this is a big deal. But she was shown a ton of mercy. Look at the circumstance, guys. What happened in this story? The angel of the presence showed up. She steps forward with the wrong heart. Who's presiding over the Ark of the Covenant when all the people bring forward their sacrifices to the priest to be handled properly, cooked, and the process of the fellowship meal takes place while the angel of the presence oversees all of it? And if they come forward and they're not clean, they could possibly go away and start to develop these things we read about in Leviticus 13. We're going to continue reading about Leviticus 14 and 15 next week. This is the circumstance, guys. This is the common denominator that we see all throughout Scripture. Whenever someone steps up with the wrong heart, or they're unclean on the outside, and they try to get close to this angel of the presence, or this amazing power of God, you can have an adverse reaction because your heart's not right, and possibly your body's not right as a result of your heart not being right? Because you didn't, your heart is where it starts, right? If you're going to actually make sure your body's prepared properly, that's a decision you make in your mind, your heart. So this is what we have here with a clear-cut example with Miriam. That she's the only one that got this. She's the only one that broke out with leprosy, white as snow, and had to wait 7 days for it to be healed. So I think it's very interesting that this idea of plague is if you have the wrong heart, the wrong body, meaning you're unclean in both, and you step before this incredible power of the presence that was emanating from the Father through this incredibly powerful angel, your body loses that encounter. You have an adverse reaction. 2 Kings chapter 5, we're going to see 2 examples of this, and they're kind of inverted, if you will. So the reason, you'll see what I mean when I go through the chapter real quick. And someone called in. I was going to finish Numbers 12 real quick and take your call, but you drop back out. You're welcome to call back in if you'd like. So it says here in 2 Kings 5, 1-5, now Naaman was the commander of the army of the king of Aram. He was a great man in his master's sight and highly regarded, for through him the Lord had given victory to Aram. He was a mighty man of valor, but he was a leper. At this time, the Arameans had gone out in bands and taken a young girl from the land of Israel. She was serving Naaman's wife, and she said to her mistress, "If only my master would go to the prophet who's in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy." How interesting, guys. Like, this is, they know that the Father has the power to cure people of this leprosy. It doesn't have to be a lifelong ailment here. Jesus cured people of leprosy. And Naaman went and told his master what the girl from the land of Israel had said. "Go now," said the king of Aram, "and I will send you a letter to the king of Israel." So Naaman departed, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, 10 sets of clothing. One second, guys. Take a quick drink. The letter he took to the king of Israel stated, with this letter, I'm sending my servant Naaman, so that you may cure him of his leprosy. And when the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes and asked, am I God, killing and giving life, that this man expects me to cure a leper? Surely you can see that he's seeking quarrel with me. Now, when Elisha, the man of God, heard that this king of Israel had torn his clothes, he sent a message to the king. He says, why have you torn your clothes? Please let the man come to me, and he will know that there is a prophet in Israel. So Naaman came with his horses and chariots and stood at the door of Elisha's house. Then Elisha sent him a messenger who said, go and wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan, and your flesh will be restored, and you will be clean. But Naaman went away angry, and he said, I thought that you would surely come out, stand, and call on the name of the Lord as God, and wave his hand over the spot to cure my leprosy. Doesn't that sound like Benny Hinn? Or maybe he would hit him with his coat. It's interesting. It's interesting. It sounds like something we've seen in the modern day, right? This is what was expected from this guy from Aram. He was like, why didn't he come out and wave his hand over me? It's interesting. Verse 12, are not the Abana and the Parphor, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Could I not have washed in them and been cleansed? So he turned and went away in rage. Naaman's servants, however, approached him and said, my father. Guys, the word father, it means ruler. This is why they're using this term, just like we do see in Genesis 45 and Job 19. My father, if the prophet had told you to do something great, would you have not done it? How much more then when he tells you to wash and be cleansed? So Naaman went down and dipped himself in the Jordan 7 times, according to the word of the man of God, and his flesh was restored and became like that of a little child, and he was clean. Excuse me, guys. So he goes on to say, I see you calling. Give me just 1 second. I'll get right to you. Okay. Then Naaman and all his attendants went back to the man of God, stood before him and declared, now I know for sure that there is no God in all earth except in Israel. So please accept a gift from your servant. But Elisha replied, as surely as the Lord lives, before whom I stand, I will not accept it. And although Naaman urged him to accept it, he refused. If you will not, said Naaman, please let me, your servant, be given as much as soil as a pair of mules can carry. For your servant will never again make a burnt offering or a sacrifice to any other God but the Lord. Yet may the Lord forgive your servant this one thing. When my master goes into the temple of Rimmon to worship there, and he leans on my arm, and I bow down in the temple of Rimmon, may the Lord give your servant in this may the Lord forgive your servant in this matter. Guys, this is super important for you guys to understand. This is what I was trying to explain about, 1 Corinthians chapter 8 and other passages where Paul talks about eating in the marketplaces versus actually worshiping a sacrifice to a foreign god, right? To an altar sacrifice. Like the rituals of worship in Baal, Rimmon is a part of Baal. So the rituals that they would worship these other gods, there were actual rituals they did, which included a lot of the bad things mentioned in Leviticus 18 through 20. Going down and bowing down, that is called obeisance. That's a form of worship, but it's not the same as literally having a fellowship meal in honor to that other god and doing the other carousing and playing, sexual activities, drinking of blood, all the other things that would go on with Baal worship. So this is why this guy promises Elisha, and he's trying to actually take land from Israel back home with him, which I think is interesting. I don't know if he's going to try to make his own little spot of land in his house where he can build an altar to God and act like he's doing it on Israel. Like this dude has clearly been converted at this point to Israel. He's been grafted in to the point where he's literally trying to take Israel with him back home because he can't stay in Israel. He's a high level commander in this Aramean army. And he's saying, look, Elisha, look, my circumstances, I have to go with my king into this temple and I have to bow down because he makes me, but I'm not going to sacrifice to any other god ever again. He says in verse 17, for your servant will never again make a burnt offering or sacrifice to any other god but the Lord. This is why he's asking for literally some soil that his animals can carry back home with him. I'm just assuming he would want to build an altar on top of that soil, acting like he's serving the Father or serving Yahweh in his own land. So he's trying to differentiate clearly here to Elisha. Look, I want to serve the Lord of heaven and earth. I know there's no other God except him in Israel. So I want to worship him and honor him because I've been healed of this leprosy. But because of my job, I'm forced to go into this other temple. But I'm not going to sacrifice to them, but they forced me to at least bow my head to them. So he's asking for forgiveness. And Elisha's like, yeah, I get it. You're cool. Think about that, guys. what did Elisha say? No, that's pagan idolatry. You should come back and you should stay in Israel. You should defect. You should kill your king. You should do. He didn't put any commands on him. He's like, yeah, go do what you got to do. He knew as the Father sees the heart. He knows people are in circumstances they don't agree with. So they're bowing. He doesn't want to bow down in this other God. He definitely doesn't want to partake in their sacrifices. But he's drew a hard line. He's going to observe Torah. He's not going to participate in their sacrifices, their burnt offerings, but he is going to be forced because of his position with the king to at least bow his head when he walks into this temple. And he's not happy about that. Elisha doesn't chastise it for him. He's like, whatever, go. So then the last part of this real quick, and I'm going to get to the caller that's calling in and waiting. Verse 19, he says, go in peace, said Elisha. But after Naaman had traveled a short distance, Gehazi, which is the servant of Elisha, the man of God, he said, look, my master has spared this Aramean Naaman, while not accepting what he brought. As surely as the Lord lives, I will run after him and get something from him. So the servant of Elisha is like, look, man, we should have gotten paid for this service. Like, I'm going to go get something from this guy. And then he tries to run after Naaman. So Gehazi, I think I'm saying that right. Gehazi pursued Naaman, and when Naaman saw him running toward him, he got up from the chariot to meet him and asked, is everything all right? Everything is all right, Gehazi replied. My master has sent me to say, I've just now discovered that 2 young men from the sons of the prophets have come to me from the hill country of Ephraim. Please give them a talent of silver and 2 sets of clothing. So now this dude is literally lying on behalf of Elisha. He's slandering, he's misrepresenting the authority given to him from Elisha, which is not good to slander one of the prophets of God. And he's lying and slandering and literally doing this at a greed because he wants something of value, because he knows that the rich man is leaving. But Naaman says, please take 2 talents. And he urged Gehazi to accept them. Then he tied up 2 talents of silver in 2 bags, along with 2 sets of clothing, gave them to two of his servants, who carried them ahead of Gehazi. When Gehazi came to the hill, he took the gifts from the servant, stored them in the house, and then he dismissed the man, and they departed. When Gehazi went in and stood before his master, Elijah asked him, Gehazi, where have you been? Your servant did not go anywhere, he replied. So now he's lying again to Elisha. But Elisha questioned him, did not my spirit go with you when the man got down from his chariot to meet you? Guys, this is great. You remember Elisha asked for a double portion. He's even a more powerful, more obedient, a prophet of God than even Elijah was. He says, in this time, is this the time to accept money and clothing, olive groves and vineyards, sheep and oxen, men servants and maidservants? Therefore, the leprosy of Naaman will cling to you and your descendants forever. And as Gehazi left his presence, he was leprous, as white as snow. Guys, this is a rough passage, but the reason why it's a rough passage is because Gehazi is literally showing an uncircumcised heart, and he's in the presence of the prophet, whom clearly the angels of God hung out around to help perform all these miracles all the time. And he's going and showing this this heart that's uncircumcised to the Father and to the heart of the Father by going and trying to extort Naaman for actual value, for actual monetary goods. So he then gets the result of someone that would step forward to the presence of the Father and be unclean in heart. It's crazy, guys. It is crazy. We have a caller right now. Tom is calling in. Hey, brother. Thank you for calling in.
Hey, how you doing? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah, thanks for waiting while I finish that passage.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks to you and your wife for the resource. It's been good help.
Oh,
so I got a question about uncleanness.
Sure.
I'm trying to nail down what exactly the difference between uncleanness and sin is.
Sure.
I heard what you said at the beginning, and yeah, it would make sense. There's kind of like a general physical uncleanness just from being in the bodies that we are, but then you see Paul and others maybe reference impurity along with other sins like idolatry and sorcery, things like that. And if he's grouping uncleanness in with those, is there like 2 different types of uncleanness?
Well, what verse are you thinking about?
Galatians 19 through 21.
Okay. Yeah, let's go look at it real quick. Because it's just want to make sure he's talking about the same thing. But yeah, I mean, obviously, yes, there's many times Paul refers to impurity as sexual impurity, which would have came from the acts I just mentioned from Baal worship.
Yeah, and this one, we'll see it.
So you say Galatians what chapter?
It's 5:19 and verses 19 through 21.
Okay. Wait 1 second here. We'll make it so everyone can see it. Yeah. All right. I'll put this up for us to both look at. So here in Galatians 5, it says the acts of the flesh are obvious: sexual immorality, impurity and debauchery, idolatry and sorcery, hatred. I mean, I could keep going, but do you think already in the context of what he's saying that he's referring to just the natural uncleanness that you would, a woman in her monthly time, or having a baby like we just read in Leviticus 12, versus what he's talking about here as far as the acts of the flesh that he's equating then to idolatry, sorcery, hatred, discord, impurity, sexual morality, debauchery, divisions, factions, rivalries, envy, drunkenness, orgies. These are all things you would find with pagan nations, and some of these actions are specific to Baal worship. So this is where I would say the impurity that's being listed here is grouped in with all these other behaviors we see from Leviticus 18 through 20, which was the acts of the nations around them for worshiping other gods. It's not just your natural biological impurity.
Okay, so there is, the word unclean has some different connotations then.
Right, because I mean, if you walked into a temple where they're slaughtering pigs and drinking their blood, you probably are going to get unclean. You're probably going to get some blood splatter on you. You're probably going to get some, you're probably going to get unclean real quick.
Right.
Right. As you remember what they also did in those temples, they sacrificed humans. So what Deuteronomy, I think it's 21 tells us, if you go into the tomb of a dead person, you're unclean for 7 days. So
sorry, I was
if you're around dead bodies, you're also unclean.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not making the argument. I'm just trying to understand what the distinction is and how it relates to some of these other verses. Another one that comes to mind is, I don't remember the verse number, but the chapter was Isaiah 66. You probably know what I'm talking about when he says that people eating swine's flesh and mice.
Right.
I don't remember the verse number off the top of my head.
Yeah, I'll go there real quick. Yeah.
But, eating those things would make you unclean, right?
Yes, 100%.
But is it more so? Is it more so because you chose you chose willingly to consume something that's unclean? That's what is worthy of perishing.
Well, what do you mean worthy of perishing?
Well, it says we'll perish together, right?
Well, yeah, he's addressing people that are practicing Baal worship.
Okay.
This is what Isaiah is addressing here, is those who consecrate themselves into the groves. You guys know, like the groves that they would have outside the cities would be these local sources where they would have the festivals of the flesh, like we just read in Galatians 5:19. These orgies. They would also do these rituals. So they had high places and they had groves. Both places they would commit these acts, and they would also eat swine flesh and drink snake venom and do all kinds of other stuff. So yeah, and eat rats, and they would do all kinds of things that were a part of their religion, which is part of this Baal worship. And so yeah, he's addressing people that are already doing the opposite behavior of God's instructions, and these are rebellious people. So
okay, so it's more so because of the idolatry rather than the eating swine.
Right. Yeah. Like, I mean, you've eaten swine. It's not saying if you've ever eaten swine once, then you're forever going to perish and die the second death. He's just saying, like, these people were intentionally rebellious. They were intentionally rejecting the Father and his ways and doing the ways of Baal. And so, yeah, they're going to suffer the punishment for that. They're going to suffer that because, of course, the whole idea of going into the groves and doing their rituals in the groves, it didn't just include the eating of flesh of swine and vermin and rats. There was this is just one quick reference to that type of practice and behavior, those rituals. The rest of the full context of the explanation of those rituals was also human sacrifice. So this is why, the punishment of death was also incurred on people that practice that behavior.
All right. So if they were, this will be a hypothetical, if they were just only eating swine's flesh and vermin, would that be only uncleanness, or would that also be sin and something to repent for?
Why are they doing it? And first of all, we're quickly stepping into the realm of judgment, and this is where I always try to remind people, I am not Yeshua. We're all going to stand before Yeshua. He's the one that has to judge us for our intent, every word and deed, And he's the one that we thankfully, he's the one that gets to judge because he's faithful and without sin. So he's the perfect judge to be most merciful. But he's the one that gets to judge everyone's intent. Why are they eating pig? Why are they eating that pepperoni pizza? Is it because they're rejecting the Father and they want nothing to do with him? Or is it because no one ever told them that makes you unclean? And what's the purpose of being unclean? I'm not saying that you should eat pepperoni pizza. I'm just saying back in the context of the tabernacle or the temple, you had to become physically clean, which means don't eat something, pepperonis from a pig. They make beef pepperonis, by the way, in case anyone's listening. But the purpose of it, if you needed to come forward to bring forward your sacrifice, or if it's, Shavuot or Sukkot or Passover, one of those 3 festivals a year that you should come present yourself to the Lord, and you're just, you're eating pepperoni pizza the day of, or the day before, and therefore you're unclean. Like, why would you're intentionally rejecting what the Father's asked for you to do in order to draw close to him. So therefore the intent would matter as far as a priest judging why someone has transgressed Torah. And thankfully, I don't know the circumstances of everyone's life and what they grew up in, whether or not they had good instruction, whether or not they knew. For many years as a Christian, I ate pork and didn't know it. Ham. I celebrated Christmas back in the day, right? Are we to say that if I had physically died and had to stand judgment in 2009 before I understood the relevance of Torah in my life as a believer, that my 11 years of being, or 12 years of being a believer at that point was for nothing? See what I'm saying? So this is where we quickly step into. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm not trying to like set up a gotcha thing or anything here. Okay. I'm just trying to understand, because I've stopped eating pork after I started understanding this. Sure. And people ask me, why are you doing that? And I'm trying to, I'm like, well, it says we shouldn't because it's unclean. But then they're like, well, does that mean it's sinful? I'm like, well, actually, I don't know if it is. I'm trying to understand exactly where it fits in.
Yeah, I understand. I didn't think you were trying to do a gotcha, brother. I'm just kind of expounding. There's a lot of other people listening, so I'm trying to cover from various angles. I do this when I answer questions because I anticipate other rejections or rebuttals, and I'm trying to address a whole bunch of stuff. So if you're just talking about the dietary laws, then that's something different. If you're just talking about, as a believer, what the Father asks of you in your discipleship, that's a little bit different. As far as he tells you, look, if you're aware of what he said is not good to do and you're doing it anyway, then that's a transgression of law. That's sin. That's where you'd come forward and bring a sin atonement offering or a guilt offering. You see what I'm saying? And this is what we don't have a temple in place. We don't have a priesthood in place. So therefore we confess our sins to Yeshua. As I mentioned earlier, he's in the temple above to make propitiation for us. It is a part of the discipleship. The Father knows that you're going to mess up, and you're going to do intentional and unintentional sins in your discipleship, which is why he gave you a priesthood. So for us as believers to come into the faith, and we read Leviticus 11 and we read Deuteronomy 14, that it's not good to eat pig. And we sit there and go, okay, well, we're struggling with it. A lot of people do. They struggle with it. I did. I struggled with probably, a good year of thinking, well, does it really apply to me? And, and I was still reading and searching. I was still growing in my sanctification, as First Peter talks about, which is a part of my discipleship process. I was still learning the knowledge of God. To get it here, to be told to you one time, you need to do this. How many people in any industry, in any facet of life, in any type of training, on a job or any type of thing, martial arts, any type of sport, no one ever does it perfectly after hearing the instruction one time. Right. Yeah. This is why you have practice. This is why Leviticus 18:4-5, the Father tells us, practice my behavior. Is there grace when we fail? 100%. That's why we have a priesthood. Do I condone people eating pig? No. Stop it as soon as you can. You see what I'm saying? Is it a sin that's going to cause you to die the second death? Well, that's why we have a priest. All the sins qualifies for the divine wrath or anger. But therefore, we have someone that mediates on our behalf to create propitiation atonement for us.
Yeah, all the sins, but is it a sin, or is it just unclean?
It is. If you are aware that the Father told you not to eat a pig product, and you eat it, you're transgressing the Torah. That would be called a sin.
Okay, isn't James said something like that, right? If it's
so that if this is what Paul talks about in Romans chapter 6 as well, that the Torah brought awareness of what sin was. So therefore, then it caused mental distress with this temptation to do it or not do it, and how he tries to overcome. And that's why at the end of chapter 7, he's shouting at that point, saying, "Oh, wretched man of sin, who will save me from this body of death?" because he's dealing with the temptation, because now he does know what he's supposed to do, and that's why he says at the end of chapter 7, like, I know what I'm supposed to do, but I find myself doing what I'm not supposed to do. You know, because he's like, who will save me from this body of death? And he praises Jesus Christ because he understands Jesus has been made our high priest to make atonement for us. So this is definitely, if you are aware that the Father told you, hey, this is not food. It's not even that these are foods that I want you to eat and these are foods that I want you to eat. The Father doesn't even consider pig food. So whenever you see, like in Romans 14, Paul talks about all foods are clean, but those who are weak in the faith don't eat meat. Well, he's not talking about pig, because the Father doesn't consider that food.
Right.
Okay. I hope that's clear for you, brother. I appreciate your patience and let me give a well-rounded answer.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome to stay out stick around if you'd like. Hannibal's calling in next. Hey, brother. What's up,
Shabbat
Hannibal?
shalom.
Shabbat shalom. Did you have a question?
Yeah, a quick one. It's regarding the whole Miriam and Aaron thing, and I was wondering why Aaron didn't catch leprosy. And my guess would be that because he has to minister for the people.
Yeah, I would agree with you. Yeah. And also he's definitely looked to in a much like everyone's looking to him on a regular basis for stuff, you know. And I haven't really done the chronological timeline, but I don't even know if this is anywhere close to the Day of Atonement or not. So like it just, you know, which would definitely require Aaron. So yeah, that would be my guess. You know, we already know that Aaron has tried to. He's like in the previous in Leviticus previously, when he lost his 2 sons and he decided not to eat of the sin offering like he was supposed to, God didn't punish him for that, because, like, you know, just kind of more to what I've been saying today, it's Aaron knew that his heart wasn't right, so he wasn't going to come forward to the Father and do what he was supposed to do as a priest with the wrong heart, and the Father didn't punish him for that. You know, so I would agree with you. I think clearly he and his sister had the wrong heart in this situation. He was shown a little bit of mercy. She was, in my opinion, shown mercy, in my opinion. Compared to what happened on Nadab and Abihu, they were both shown mercy. But as far as like an outward physical, I don't know if, you know, having your flesh turn white as snow is itchy or uncomfortable. I don't know what that physically feels like. But hey, if you just challenge the creator of heaven and earth, and all you got to do is hang outside the camp for 7 days and you're white as snow and you suffer a little social shame, then you come back, you know, and you get your heart right, to me, that's you did all right in that scenario. You showed a lot of mercy in that scenario. You know what I mean? Yeah.
And I would also like to thank you and Lindsay for the whole clarification with the sin offering and the sin atonement, not only being for, you know, covering sin, but also for cleansing, because that's something that whenever that whole topic comes up in Leviticus 12, it's, you know, a head scratcher, right? Because if it's just uncleanness, it doesn't mean that you have sinned, but sin means transgression of the law, then you're always, you know, hitting this wall when it says that you make a sin offering, right? But yeah, I had to look up, you know, the Hebrew meaning and look at the etymology of the word, and it cleared up. And I was wondering if there's any better way to make a translation in English to make people not that confused, or at least, because no one teaches, you know, to look up the definitions of words. That's why everyone is getting caught up in this specific passage. Even I was, until like last week or something. But I was wondering if there's any better English word for that specific type of atonement made in Leviticus 12.
I haven't seen it. I think, you know, it's one of those deals where it would, you know, if you were to make a modern English version of that, you would probably do that. But I think people that were going through this during the days of Moses and Aaron, they're already familiar with these general concepts, because remember, even Baal worship had a twisted version of the priesthood and these practices and rituals. And so, which is what we just read from Tom's call in Isaiah 66, you know, where they purify themselves and go into the groves. So they were already going, like the pagan rituals, they already go through their own types of purification rituals to do worship for their gods. So it's like they already have their own ideas that are, even though they're twisted and they're backwards and they're not scriptural, but they because they got them from the patriarchs after the flood. They got them from Noah and his descendants trying to teach them Torah, and then they took and twisted these ideas and became Babylon. So this is where, you know, they kind of had an understanding of these ideas. Same with all these children of Israel coming with Moses and Aaron. They're learning now true process of sin atonement versus pertaining to all the different circumstances that it would apply. And so therefore it would probably be the learning curve would probably be a much easier comprehension for them, in my opinion. For us, we're really, we have to do all this detective work, to try to figure out, well, okay, what context was this in? All right, what's the definition of the word? All right, so yeah, because unfortunately there are little subtleties like that get lost in translation. So,
Well,
but
yeah,
this
thank you
is the
for
honor of
clarifying
kings. Yeah,
Yeah,
brother.
that was everything. Shabbat shalom, everyone.
Okay, thanks, Hannibal. Shabbat shalom to you.
Take care.
You too. All right, guys, we're going to finish up real quick our companion passage, Isaiah chapter 30. We're going to go into this a little further, and this is in the return of the Lord. Sorry, my dog is excited when I said return of the Lord, I guess. So Isaiah chapter 30, 23 through 27, he says, "Then he will send rain for the seed that you have sown in the ground, and the food that comes from your land will be rich and plentiful on the day that your cattle will graze in open pastures. The oxen and the donkeys that work the ground will eat salted fodder, winnowed with shovel and pitchfork. And from every high mountain and every raised hill, streams of water will flow in the day of great slaughter, when the towers fall. The light of the moon will be as bright as the sun, and the light of the sun will be 7 times brighter, like the light of 7 days, on the day that the Lord binds up the brokenness of his people and heals the wounds he has inflicted." And I'm drawing some emphasis there because I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. "Behold, the name of the Lord comes from afar with burning anger and dense smoke. His lips are full of fury. His tongue is like a consuming fire." Just in case you didn't realize what we're reading, this is the day of the Lord at his return. Verse 28 through 30, "His breath is like a rushing torrent that rises to the neck. He comes to sift the nations in a sieve of destruction. He bridles the jaws of the people to lead them astray. You will sing as on the night of a holy festival, and your heart will rejoice. Your heart will rejoice like one who walks to the music of a flute, going up to the mountain of the Lord, to the rock of Israel. And the Lord will cause his majestic voice to be heard and his mighty arm to be revealed, striking in anger, wrath, with a flame of consuming fire, with the cloudburst, with the storm, and with hailstones." Now we read about this fulfillment in other passages as well, as obviously Revelation talks about this a lot. This is the coming of the Son of Man. This is the Father returning through the agency of his Son before the New Jerusalem sets down. The Son is going to return with a bunch of angels. This is Matthew 24, 29 through 31. And he's going to take out the wicked. And this is a day of battle. In fact, there's a massive earthquake that happens. But of course, the mountain of the Lord, which is the New Jerusalem, does descend after Yeshua returns, and it removes the wicked from that area. This is the mountain of the Lord. This is what Isaiah chapter 2 also talks about. That was the Masoretic. Let's read the Septuagint. There's 3 more verses. Verse 31 through 33, "For Assyria will be shattered at the voice of the Lord. He will strike them with his scepter, and with every stroke of the rod of punishment that the Lord brings down on them, the tambourines and the lyres will sound as he battles with brandished weapons." Guys, what is Assyria? Who's Mystery Babylon that gets destroyed at the coming of the Lord? And in the 42 months leading up to the coming of the Lord, in my understanding. So yes, the system of Babylon, which is ruled by Apollyon, which is the return of Nimrod, and all the 10 kings of the earth who are in that system that give their authority and allegiance to Nimrod for this moment to try to fight Yeshua at his return. They're all destroyed. This is why it says, "For Assyria will be shattered at the voice of the Lord. He will strike them with his scepter." It's not just Apollyon, but it's everyone, all the armies that are allied to him to try to fight Yeshua at his return. Verse 33, "For Tophet," that is the Old Testament word for the in this particular reference, it's referencing the lake of fire. "For Tophet has long been prepared. It has been made ready for the king." Remember, Apollyon, ancient Nimrod, returns as Apollyon. He's thrown into the lake of fire when Yeshua returns. "Its funeral pyre is deep and wide, with plenty of fire and wood. The breath of the Lord, like a torrent of burning sulfur, sets it ablaze." So this is the I see caller calling in. If you just give me 1 second, I'm going to finish up this little companion passage real quick, and then we'll get your call. 43 through 47, 43, 47, Makkah in the Strong's Concordance. This is this Hebrew word that we're seeing for plague that's used in this passage I just read. So when he strikes the earth, this is where it says, this is actually, there's different ways that this word can be used. The ways is plague, but this is the word that's being used in this passage when he talks about coming and striking the people. And the reason why I said this, guys, because in verse 26, he says that he binds up and heals the wounds he has inflicted. And this word, wounds he has inflicted, is that word Makkah that I just showed you from Strong's. This is he's so yes, it can be wounds, but it also can be the plague. And we see in Zechariah 14, it actually uses the term plague, that when he returns, he strikes people with this type of plague, which is it's a, what I would say is a quickening. It happens faster, a much more intense, severe version of what we see that we just read from Leviticus 13, where the plague happens and people start to develop this and their skin starts to boil and rot away or turn white, as if it's a baby who's half rotted away, born from a mother's womb, a stillborn baby. We see that to its full extent with a severity at the return of Yeshua, when he is coming back and he strikes everything that is trying to fight him with this plague. Why? Because he is utter purity, and utter impurity is standing before him. So yes, they will be distorted at the brightness of his coming, not just because he's so bright it would affect them, it would be blinding to them, but also because there's fire coming from before him, but literally also because he's a glorified spiritual being now. He's bringing other glorified spiritual beings with him, these angels, and they're about to go fight the most corrupt beings on the earth, a bunch of Nephilim, a bunch of men with improper hearts who are coming to fight against him, as well as Apollyon and the second beast, the false prophet. So a whole bunch of people that would disqualify themselves, according to Leviticus 13, that would be unclean to step before the presence of the mighty God. You have the most exact representation of the Father, Hebrews 1 through 3, embodied in Yeshua, coming down and interacting with them. Yes, they're going to lose that battle in every single regard, even the biological regard. They're going to be hit with the plague, because that is 100% the reaction of the physical flesh, especially the corrupted flesh, when it comes in contact with the incorruptible, glorified spiritual beings of heaven. So this is why they're going to lose that battle. There's no weapon they could create that would ever win that battle. At a biological level, built into the creation, they lose this battle. So in Isaiah, I'm not going to read through the fullness of this. It just shows you the same thing, that even in the Septuagint, it goes on to say that he destroys them with a burning fire that comes from his lips, the burning anger of his wrath. This is the day of the Lord that he goes into. Just so people can, you're welcome to go and read that in the Septuagint, the same passage from Isaiah chapter 30. It just shows you, speaking about the same thing. It's the day of the Lord. He's even as comes down with the New Jerusalem, the lake of fires in the Jerusalem. That's why it talks about the trench that's kindled with sulfur that is prepared for these people that try to fight against him. So just to give you the furthering application of this huge concept throughout Scripture, that it really, this is where my wife and I, by the way, welcome, wifey.
Hello.
This is where
on the last go around.
I ignored you. What are you talking about?
I was backstage. Before Hannibal.
Oh, I didn't see you. It didn't pop up in my studio. So just like we talked about a couple of years ago, we were breaking down this entire concept. If you don't understand the first resurrection, right? This is one of our themes of our context tree. The first resurrection, if you dig into that topic, you start to realize what type of spiritual body you receive at the first resurrection as a resurrected believer, like the Messiah and Second Baruch explained to us. You get this glorified resurrected body. It's also what Paul tries to explain in 1 Corinthians 15. You get the same type of body that the angels got. It's an immortal body. It's well, unless you're thrown in the lake of fire. That's the only thing that can kill it. But it's an immortal body that'll live forever. You get this different type of biology. You're not made of the dirt anymore. You're made of water and spirit. And so when a being made of water and spirit tries to interact with a being made of dirt, there is an adverse reaction if there's too much power emanating from the water and spirit being, if that makes any sense. So this is it's kind of the general premise of the idea that we're seeing all throughout the Scriptures play out, this underlying theme of biology, of how Adam was made from the dirt versus the angels of heaven and what they're made of. So when they're trying to interact with all the Israelites who are made of dirt in the wilderness, there's certain rules that have to apply so that the people made of dirt don't get hurt. If you're made of dirt, you can get hurt, right? So that may be the simplest bumper sticker way to remember that. So if you're made of water and spirit, you don't have to fear it. Man, that's bad. That is bad. But maybe it'll work for some people to remember. Yeah. Did you have
Is it
a
my
thanks
turn
for
now?
calling in. Did you have a question?
No, I don't have a question. I've actually been trying to get involved in the conversation about the issue of uncleanness and sin offerings since it was happening in the chat. And I wanted to call in and just offer some clarity because I know sometimes things get lost. Someone may think they're asking you a question that sounds clear, and to you, it's not really a very clear question. So the question that was being asked in the chat is, if uncleanness isn't a sin in the sense of breaking a moral commandment, then why is there a sin offering required when someone is unclean? And so what I was telling people in the chat is that a sin offering is about atonement. And if we look at that word atonement, a lot of people boil it down to reconciliation with God and being forgiven by God for doing something bad. But atonement is also for cleansing. So
That's
in
right.
other passages, like in Exodus, we see instructions to make atonement for inanimate objects inside of the tabernacle.
That's right.
So obviously we know those inanimate
Mm,
objects didn't
yeah.
get up and walk around like, from Beauty and the Beast and do, commit sins,
Right.
they need to be cleansed. And so now can we explain the physics of the blood being involved in cleansing and all of that? No. But the sin offering for uncleanness, it's a sin offering and not a guilt offering because it's about cleanness. So to me, I think that sin offering is probably just signifying the end of that person's, 7 days or whatever of being unclean. It signifies that they're clean and being acknowledged that they're clean. It's not actually how they become clean, because clearly it's the time frame. You're unclean for 7 days, then at the evening of whatever day you're clean, then you go make the offering. So I just wanted to clarify that because I didn't get to give that much detail in the chat. And then for anyone listening later on, Hannibal kind of summed it up a little bit. But I just wanted to remind people that atonement is made for actual objects in the sanctuary. So it's the sin offering for uncleanness has to be about the cleansing aspect and not because, a woman has committed a moral injustice by having a
Sure.
baby.
That's why I had said earlier, and I didn't expound on this with great depth and detail. So thank you so much for calling in to do that.
Yeah,
But that's why I said earlier, it definitely depends on the context of what is happening. So the people back then, yes, they would agree with you. The tabernacle vessels, the furniture that had to be cleansed, they didn't do anything wrong. But if a person was unclean, they didn't do anything wrong, but there's just still what's required so that you can step forward to the Father, and it falls under the category of a sin offering. So because it's, there's a difference in this idea of, just transgressing. And this is where Catholics have taken this to a detrimental and unproductive extent by claiming original sin. Because they'll say, well, look, you're born unclean, you're born in sin, you need a sin offering in Old Testament. So therefore you're born like you're just already sinning. Like, no, there's a difference between like what we're saying, just something that needs to be cleansed as a result of the spiritual interacting. And the spiritual is not an intangible term, guys. The angels that we're talking about, they're spiritual beings. That's a classification. That's a word not given to something that's just extra dimensional. That's a classification of a word given to something that's a different form of creation. This is why Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, the earthy was made first of mankind, but then he'll become spiritual, because you're made of the dirt, but then you'll be made of the spirit later, which is water and spirit, as opposed to having the breath of the spirit of life breathed into the dirt. So there's the spirit is literally a classification of a form of creation. It's not just a referential term that can be used however you like it. Like a lot of people like to use it. Like you'll just use the word spiritual, right? They just get into all the spiritual talk, not realizing that the angels are called spirit beings. God is a spirit being. At the resurrection, you will be made a spirit being. You're not going to be made a dirt being like you are now. You're made a spirit being. So it's a type of creation. So when those two interact, there will naturally be the dirt needs to acquiesce in order to be in the presence of that spiritual being so it doesn't get hurt. So that's what my wife, I think, she's trying to explain, that it's not because you did anything intentional, but that there's a natural thing involved in this process of the two different types of creation interacting. I hope that makes any sense to the people listening.
Hopefully it does. It looks like I triggered someone in the comments who's upset with me using the term moral in terms of this conversation we're having as far as breaking a I'm pretty sure I said committing a moral injustice. I don't think I said breaking a moral command, because anyone who watches our channel long enough knows Sean and I believe all God's laws are moral. I literally made that a status on my Facebook, like on multiple occasions, that all God's laws are moral. So just for that person who's upset by that comment, just so you know, I was just trying to explain the difference between transgressing part of the it's from Rafi Ben Avi. Transgressing a part of the law through being unclean, I wouldn't consider that breaking a commandment, like going and committing adultery or stealing something. So what other words am I supposed to use? Maybe you can help us. What other words am I supposed to use when I'm trying to differentiate between breaking a commandment that doesn't have any effect on your life beyond you just are physically unclean because of a bodily function, versus going out and deliberately transgressing against the Father's law and breaking a commandment that goes against all the morals that he puts forth for us. So hopefully hopefully you're hearing me and you're not just picking apart the words that I'm choosing to use, because yes, I understand that in dispensational theologies, there's this concept of ceremonial laws and moral laws, and Sean and I don't subscribe to that. So hopefully that's clear.
Yeah, sometimes we just people want to pick apart certain word phraseology, word usage. This is why we're always talking about context. So the context of everything that we've been saying today is to express the scriptures and the differences, the interaction between the spiritual and the fleshly. So hopefully that's the overarching idea that you're understanding when we try to break down some of the terms, whether you use a term that you're comfortable with or not. I'm looking for any questions that we may have in the chat. Looks like we have a few. Dave Lewis is asking, do you think the angels followed the feast days before they sinned? Yeah, I do. I think that just like Jubilees chapter 6 tells us that all the angels in heaven kept Shavuot since creation began. And every single time one of the feast days is mentioned in the book of Jubilees, and they're all mentioned, and every single time that they're mentioned and explained which patriarch kept it and when he when he became aware of it and he started keeping it, it says that these are written on the tablets in heaven. So that means there's a Bible in heaven, guys, of some sort. There's a collection of instructions in heaven of some sort the angels follow. And written on those tablets are all these feast days. So this is why we call it eternal Torah. It's never going away. It's always been here. It's the instructions for living. It's simple as that.
One thing we should probably clarify is that it seems Passover may be one special meal that is somehow different in heaven, because Yeshua does say that he won't eat of that meal until he returns and when it's fulfilled in the kingdom. So, but Passover technically isn't a feast day. It's not a Sabbath that leads into the first Sabbath of that week. But I just wanted to, add that little caveat.
Well, I think some of the conversation can be had as far as what's the context of Yeshua making that statement. Is he saying that he won't eat that meal, or is he saying he won't eat that meal with his disciples until it's fulfilled in the kingdom? Because that's when he'll see them again.
I guess so. It could be both.
It just depends on how much of the previous passages you pull into the context of that statement, because they definitely are celebrating unleavened bread in the kingdom and eating. In my opinion, they're eating on the first day of unleavened bread. So, but we can look at that another time. Real quick, Lisa Mendez is asking, is the ministration, I think she meant to say the menstruation of the woman, a curse given to us after the fall? The blood that is loss of unfertilized egg that never became a baby.
I don't think there's any scripture that would.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. We must have a delay. Go ahead.
Sorry. I don't see any scripture that would be able to answer that question definitively for us. I think we were created as, flesh beings from the dirt with the breath of life, blown into us, into our nostrils. And so I'm not comfortable with saying that our biology was different before we sinned, just because for me, as a former, fan of Gnosticism, that's a major teaching in Gnosticism, is that they were spirit beings before the fall, and then they fell, and then they got these terrible flesh bodies, and what a curse it is.
And in addition to getting the flesh bodies, that they also received sexual organs at that time.
Right.
Which would be the womb and everything being mentioned in this question. Yeah.
Didn't he
So
tell them to be fruitful and multiply before they
that's
were
the
kicked
general.
out?
That's the general
Not
premise.
saying that they did necessarily,
Yeah.
but I don't feel like he would tell her to be fruitful and multiply if she didn't have bodily functions that, facilitate that process.
Sure. Yeah. I think she was made the way she was. She wasn't changed. I think she was made the way she was, called good to begin with. Jubilees chapter 4, 3 and 4 tells us that Adam did not know his wife in a sexual way to birth a baby until after they left the garden. So what happened during that time? I don't know. What happened with the fruit from the tree of life that she was eating for 7 years? Did it not cause her to menstruate in that way? I mean, we know a woman's diet can affect her menstruation. We also are told in 2 Baruch chapter 78 that during the millennial reign, women's menstruation and birthing will be less painful. And I suggest it's because we actually have the river of life coming out of the New Jerusalem, which was the same river they had in the Garden of Eden. So I think that probably drinking that water probably had a lot to do with it as well. So I think, her body was still the same, but I think that the idea of the pain and possibly the things that go with it could have started to increase once she was away from the tree of life and away from the water of life. If that makes any
It
sense.
definitely feels like a curse.
Right.
So I can
Well, no,
understand
I mean,
why most women do
it was clearly told in Genesis 3 that was one of the after effects that would happen. So great question, Lisa. Hopefully we addressed it thoroughly. All right, guys, I'm going to be wrapping up the show pretty soon. Just have one last thing. There's been so many, I haven't had a good flow. I think I was trying to do something a little different with this episode, but I don't think I did well. I apologize to the viewer. I don't think I did well going back and forth between my outline versus the callers versus the music clips I wanted to play versus. So I apologize if it seemed a little discombobulated today with the flow, but I even had this pulled up. I forgot to include it. It's just from Enoch 54. Actually, let me put it on screen a different way. It's just from Enoch 54, just to show you that it is the angels who take Azazel and it's Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Phanuel. They take Azazel and not Azazel. They bind up Azazel, but then they cast into the fiery furnace, which is the lake of fire, the kings of the earth and the mighty, and those who allied themselves with the beast and the second beast. They seem to throw them into a burning fire on the day of the Lord. And now I'm saying this wrong. It's the kings of the earth and the mighty. There's a deep valley burned with fire that's designated for them. Again, I'm all off, guys. I can explain it better later, but I'm out of what I was talking about earlier because we went on to different questions. I apologize. That's not going to make any sense to everybody. Point is, lake of fire shows up with the New Jerusalem. That's all I'm trying to get at. And then there's a point of judgments between those who are these unclean spiritual beings that come up and show with the Polyon versus mankind and how they're judged. I can go over it with a different episode. But I think we've taken all the questions we have today. We don't have any other people trying to call in. And Sweetie, since you're here still, would you have any closing thoughts that you'd like to share?
Just want to say Shabbat Shalom. Thanks for joining us, everyone. And like Sean said at the beginning, this coming Friday, we'll be doing our first ladies' night, milk and meat. I've been requested a lot to do something like that, and I just personally haven't felt motivated or led to do it. And then just recently, within the last few days, I've felt more comfortable with the idea, but I am going to have my husband there with me. But it's pretty much just going to be ladies topics, women's issues in the body and whatever you girls want to talk about. And we can have women call in, and there's going to be some things I can't give advice on. I'm actually pretty new to the walk. I'm only about 5 or 6 years old in the faith. I'm only 3 years old in marriage. I only have dog children. So there's some things I can't and I won't give advice about, but I'm happy to connect, women and have other women who may have, more experience with those things come on and answer questions, if they feel led. So I think we'll probably do it around 7:00, and we're not committing to any specific amount of times that we'll do it per month because that's just how I am. I'm kind of flaky. So I just want to pretty much pop on and chat with you ladies as I feel led.
So Sweetie, what you're trying to say is you're not starting a new series.
No.
Okay. You're just saying
no, it's not a new series. You
just want to do this from time to time.
Yes, I
Okay.
want to serve the women of the body a little more specifically, as they've been requesting for a while now, and I feel like Father's softened my heart to it. So I feel comfortable with the idea. And so next Friday, probably around 7. So a lot of women asked if I would let them know ahead of time so that they could make sure that they, you know, had time and weren't just kind of surprised by it and didn't know it was going to be happening. So
Okay.
yeah, so I just wanted to give that, little detail, and that's all I have to add.
Okay. Thank you. Well, thank you also everyone in the chat. You guys are awesome. Thanks for keeping the peace in the chat and not getting, sometimes when you start really digging into the details of the instructions that we get in the earlier parts of the Bible, a lot of people start to really struggle with preconceived teachings they've heard in the past. And, like Hannibal called in earlier and he was like, wow, I just never even looked up the definition of that word. And he had a misconception about that word and the application of it in certain passages. So just, that's the kind of thing that can sometimes turn into arguments in the chat. So we appreciate everybody staying chill and calm, keeping the Sabbath peace on the chat. We appreciate everyone being here and interacting. Last question. Scott Mavicker is asking about the next Babylon installment. Guys, the next 2 videos I'm working.
I ask that every day.
every day. Guys, the next thing is these next 2 videos I'm working on. They're huge as far as like the amount of information I'm trying to compile into a palpable hour and 20 minutes or whatever to go over this information, and the other projects that I've been working on, and with the contextual study Bible and everything involved, I just haven't had time to finalize everything down. Some of my Investigating Babylon series installments I can put together in 2 hours, right? That's manageable for me. Others, it takes a lot of effort as far as finding certain clips from things, finding stuff that's not going to give me a copyright strike, it just takes time, guys. There's a lot of prep work involved in creating videos. So it just takes time. So yeah, I'm still working on it and it'll be coming out, Lord willing. It'll be coming out sooner than later. I just haven't finished, to my satisfaction. I haven't finished yet the next episode that I'm going to be doing, which will be on NASA. So, all right, guys, I appreciate everyone that's here. We hope you have a great rest today, and we look forward to seeing you again next week.